Oh, chapter 11, energy. Now, energy is a very broad topic. You can spend a whole class or even a whole life, a whole academic career studying energy. What we want to focus on is these two main questions. One, what type of energy source should we be using? Now, this might seem to you at first like an obvious or simple question to answer, but hopefully, as I'll show you for the rest of this chapter, that this is not as obvious or as clear as it might seem. Second, this is the question that's a more important question. Why do nations and markets choose a particular type of energy source? Right? We are going to try to connect some factors and try to understand and even predict in the near future what is the trend of energy, right? As countries become more developed, what type of energy source, what type of fuel would they use? Okay. Now, first we begin with looking at the history of the U.S. energy consumption. You can see that in the beginning, for the first 100 years, the U.S. used mostly biofuel, meaning in the form of wood. Okay, and you can argue biofuel is mostly sustainable or at least renewable. Right? And then Industrial Revolution came about. Started using more coal, and then the early 1900s, petroleum refinement, automobile came about. We started increasing using petroleum, right? And a couple of decades later, natural gas usage dramatically increased as well. Okay, and what you think about when you look at charts like this, you want to think about the infrastructure that is required when an economy or society moves and chooses a particular type of fuel. Right? Think about transportation. Right? How difficult it is to transport natural gas versus, let's say, coal, right? Or petroleum. Okay, and you can see that here, nuclear power, right? Obviously, a even more advanced type of fuel source, and so that didn't come about until the late 1970s. Okay, now why do we want to study the historical trend of energy consumptions of developed countries? Right, looking at the trend like this. Well, so this is the first punchline of this chapter: is that regardless of culture and regardless of even location, most of the time, when a country goes from a developing nation, like the U.S. did, to a developed nation, they tend to follow the similar trend. So if you look at developed countries, right, you will see that the developed countries will have some. All developed countries will have a similar energy mix, right, with some of the choice of energy. Versus if you look at developing countries, you will also see the developing countries will have a similar energy mix. So where do we find these kind of data? So we need a convenient way of categorizing countries or separating them between developed and developing. And so OECD is kind of the international standard for us to do that. So data that you will find at World Bank, the UN, you will find data organized in terms of OECD and non-OECD. Now, what is OECD? OECD is just an organization for economic cooperation and development. Think of it as a country club that member countries join when their economy becomes a certain reaches a certain advancement level, a certain productivity level. Right. So let's take a look here. Right, this is the website, and OECD, the membership began in 1961. So you see the year of accession. These are when these countries join. So all the 1961 are the original members. Okay, and in the beginning, it was the European countries and North American, so Canada and the U.S. And then as countries become more developed economically speaking, they joined in later. Okay. Most recently, we can see here. Most recently, Colombia. Colombia joined in 2020. Okay. All right. Now, what do I? Now we want to make the connection between economic development or economic advancement with fuel source, right? The type of energy, the type of energy choices. Okay, so let's take a look at the other link that I had on here. So this is IEA. This is IEA data, and let me make this a little bit smaller. There we go. All right, so this is IEA data, right? And what a convenient thing. This is a very convenient website because it breaks it down you can look at different regions, countries or regions, and then look at the fuel mix and fuel mix over time. Now these are stacked. These are stack diagrams. The top line here represents the total. So let's say, for example, this is the world, and we can see here, the total energy supply is about maybe a 14 million kiloton of oil equivalent, KTOE. That is a kiloton of oil equivalent, right? We are comparing all these different fuel sources, so we must compare apple to apple. So we're gonna convert. So we need to convert each energy source into its oil equivalent. Now we're not gonna go into the details here, but basically, the typical way that this is done is through like a thermal unit. So for example, BTU, right? So you look at you look at, okay, or how many, how much coal does it take to generate, to heat up a gallon of water, right? And then you will, do the same. You look at natural gas. How much natural gas would it take to heat up a gallon of water? And then you look at, so you'll convert everything into its heat source. Okay, so it's a good comparison. But here we can see that. So for example, here, so when you stack them up like this, right, and color code them, you can see that right now, in the entire world, coal and oil represents the primary source of energy. Energy, right, and then second would be natural gas, right? And if you hover about each line, you can see how much coal, you can see how much natural gas, right, over the years, and you can see how much nuclear, right, and how much hydro, renewable, and so on, right? So you can see all here. Oh, okay. Now, so this is the world. Now I said, my claim was that if you pick any OECD country, you will see a very similar energy mix. Okay. So for example, let's look at Spain. Right? Spain is the OECD country. Okay. Let's take a look at Spain here, and then we see that here, not a lot of coal, but a lot of natural gas, nuclear, oil. Okay, let's just go to pick any countries at random, right? Germany, right? Germany definitely OECD country, right? We see that coal, natural gas, nuclear, oil, right? Canada, okay. Canada, we see the same thing. A little bit less coal, a lot of natural gas. So fossil fuel, right? Oil plays a dominant role. A lot of fossil fuel here. Okay. Now these are all OECD countries. Now let's compare that to a non-OECD country. For example, let's do Sudan. All right. So now, before I click on it, when you think about what do you imagine the energy composition of Sudan will look like? Okay, so the color changes, right? But this is mostly, so look at the legend. It's mostly all biofuel and oil, right? And hydro. Okay, let's look at another one. Maybe Zimbabwe. Same thing here, right? Again, culturally very different. There's nothing really connecting these countries except for the fact that they're both considered developing countries. And what we see is the energy composition is that primary fuel source is biofuel, and waste. Okay, now biofuel. Biofuel, right? We can argue that it is more sustainable, and it is technically, I guess, in a way, we can consume it in a renewable fashion. So the question is who is correct, right? Should we go back? Should we go back and using biofuel? And also we want to think about why does every country move away from biofuel as they become more developed and move towards a more a fuel mix closer to a developed country, right? Why do we see this similarity in fuel mix in all the developed countries? Okay, so all right, so and think about what type of energy source should we be using. Now, there are many factors. There are many factors that could cause a country to wanting to move away from biofuel. One of the major concern is indoor air pollution. So when you use biofuel in the form of wood and agriculture waste, right, it creates a major health hazard. Okay, and these are not small numbers. Right, we are talking about millions of people who die every year due to indoor air pollution. Right, so this is a major motivation for countries, for developing countries to move away from biofuel, right? And what we see the trend, as we just saw, is that when these countries move away from biofuel or biomass, they will, unless something changes, they will tend to go towards fossil fuel. Okay, and that is the trend that we are seeing. So there's one last picture here. Here's a source of U.S. Electricity generation, and like 20 a little bit closer look. Right, majority fossil fuel, mostly natural gas, coal, bit of nuclear, and a very bit of renewable. Okay, so this is the picture that you should have in mind, right? So as these countries as these developing countries become more developed, this is the energy mix that they will most likely follow, unless something significant changes.